sit down. We got a seat for you.
Okay. My mom has prayed a prayer for myself and for everyone involved for a very long time. And that's, God give us eyes to see the path, the wisdom to go forth, and speed to get there.
Is it true that he's inspired by Tim Tebow?
That kind of emboldened Stingray to do, he's like, I can do this too, Tim.
He looked up to
Yeah,
him.
he looked up to him, and he was a good role model. So thank you, Tim, wherever you are. We appreciate you.
Have you had people give you a hard time because of your bold proclamation of your faith?
Yeah, I think so, a little bit. I mean, usually people are pretty kind face to face, but go to social media and that's a different story.
One thing that your parents and your grandparents shared with me is that they were your pit crew, and there were a lot of mistakes made at different times. Were you sometimes angry about it? Did you have to forgive them?
I think that along the way I learned how to forgive, but at the same time, it was very fun because I made mistakes too. And that was something that I had to learn for myself as well. How do I feel about myself when I fail myself? How do I forgive myself?
I'm Adrienne Bankert. Welcome to One Nation Under God. Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up? Some grow into their destiny, right? Others know their destiny. At a very young age, they begin dreaming about their future. And at only 3 years old, Ray Robb was doing just that. This year, he's competing as number 41 in this year's Indy 500, but he knew he wanted to be a race car driver as a very young boy. And from his hometown to all over Europe and at the biggest races here in the U.S., he's had quite the ride. Now, at what is racing Super Bowl, driving a Chevy-powered car with legendary motorsports racing team AJ Foyt, this is his second time in the Indy 500. And this year, he's making history. The first Indy car driver ever to be sponsored by a company that is at its core faith-based. Pray.com will be prominently shown on his car. It will be the first partnership of its kind, and Stingray was inspired at a very young age by none other than Christian athlete Tim Tebow. Now, as you'll hear in our interview, it's not the first time he's made a public display of his faith. I had the chance to sit down with Stingray, but first I sat down with his family. I met with them to see what it's like to pursue this kind of American dream. It's a story you'll only see on NewsNation. And by the way, Stingray is his real legal name.
Sometimes it feels like we've been in a war together. We're like the band of brothers or something.
When you say like a war, is it because of the intensity? Is it because of how much you travel? Is it because of it's hard?
It's intensity.
It's
We're
all
like
of that. It is literally all of that. But when you're at the track, it's another level of intensity that you're enduring as a group. And when you see a big crash happen, you're like, please get through, and then you see the smoke clears and he's through, or he didn't make it through. But yeah, it is.
When we were trying to make the last spot in the Indy 500 last year, because he's so well, I think, accepted. Most people liked it when he was on their teams with the Andretti's and the other teams that he was on. And we look around and we're down there. There's nobody there but these 4 guys trying to get that last spot. And we look around and here's all the Andretti guys. And here's all the other teams that were there rooting him on. They said, well, we got to be there. And some of the people there were there to support Kimmy because she was a wreck. She could barely stand up, and she doesn't get that emotional. But that day she was emotional, and I asked her. I said, "So, because you're waiting all night, and then you got to go out the next day." And it was like, "Okay, Kimmy, I'm sure I know the answer to this. Would you rather go through childbirth?"
You asked her this question?
Yeah, and
You're a
or
brave
this, or this. She goes, "Oh, I'd rather go through childbirth than this any day."
That was incredibly stressful. Childbirth, you knew what was happening at the end. At this, you didn't know.
You don't know.
Yeah.
The saying is that if you win the championship, you'll be famous. But if you win the Indy 500, you're immortal.
Yeah,
That's true. That's true.
The 500 is pretty much the Super Bowl. Even though it's mid-season, for us, it's mid-season. So, but it's our Super Bowl.
Who was the race car driver that inspired Stingray? Were you the fast driver? Who's the one peeling out of the driveway?
We all were.
He was a drag racer.
You're a drag racer?
Yeah.
The kid's name is Stingray.
Wait a minute,
Are you
wait.
going to avoid
Stingray,
that?
wait a minute. Yeah, because I wanted to know.
Corvette, Stingray Corvette.
So, but it was Dad's idea or Mom's idea to name
Yes.
him.
We never argued about it. It was like it was magical too.
You
Like, okay,
both
this is it.
decided that you're going to name your son on his birth certificate Stingray Robb.
Yes.
Since his 3, he's been on the go.
You said at age 3. So is that when you remember him racing, or that's when he was actually?
That's when he asked for his first go-kart.
He wanted a go-kart. So Kimmy and I said, well, you got to be 5. He was like 2.5.
2.5, and he said, "I want to go kart."
And he said he wanted to be a Formula One driver at that time. He didn't even know what a Formula One driver really was. But so on his 5th birthday, we had ordered a go-kart from across the United States, and it came in a box, and it's pieces, like 200, 300 pieces, and there's no instructions. We didn't know anybody that owned a go-kart. We didn't know if we had a go-kart track even close to us. We were in Boise, Idaho. So we got it. I put it together. A couple of years later, I found out it wasn't really correct, but it worked for him. But we put it together. So his 5th birthday, we put it out in the garage. And so we said, well, let's go outside. And we raised the garage door, and he looked at it and he goes, I've waited all my life to be 5. And sure enough, that's where it started. And he's never looked back. He really hasn't. So it got, he went out and started winning races right off the bat. And we had the tendency to move him up to the next age group before he was old enough. And he sometimes would complain about that, but that was kind of what we felt like was going to help him in his career, because you're always going to have to look at the next guy that you got to beat. And that's what got us to IndyCar, I believe, is that kind of attitude. His mother was a basketball player and holds the record for 3-point shots in her high school when she was about as big as a minute. And things like that. She was competitive in everything she did, basketball, tennis. So everything we've done has been competitive. But once we started, we never looked back. So we would drive places because we didn't have a real competitive track where we were, or we would get to where he was winning all the races where we were. And
Pretty
then we'd
soon
go,
you've won everything there, and you're going, okay, where do we go next? So yeah, it was just
and
kind of
then
that
we ended up
gradual.
we ended up going to Europe.
Oh, wow.
So when he was 9, we were in Europe, not because he was a
9?
good driver. Yeah.
Do you guys ever get nervous?
Oh, I got a quick story. When he went to the Indy 500 last year, I mean, they can tell you I haven't really been too nervous because we've been together all along. So, but the first time he went down the straightaway at the Indy 500 at 240 miles an hour, I'm watching, like
It takes your breath away.
You're
my
sweating?
hands are wet.
You're sweating.
My palms never sweat in my life, but they did that day. I'm okay now, but that first time watching your kid go by at 240,
You
They're
can't
so
even see the car. You don't even know, was that him? It's so
You can
fast.
kinda
You
tell
can't
the
feel
car.
it, or you don't understand how fast it is until you're standing there and you're like,
On TV, it
What-
looks like they're
what
crawling around.
mother? What
On
grandmother?
TV, it looks like they're crawling.
karting it's a little metal tube frame with a seat that's sitting this far off the ground, and they're going as they go up further.
No
But they're,
roll
they
bars,
go,
no seat belts.
there's no seat belts, there's no roll cage, there's no nothing, and they're out there starting when they're 5, going 45 miles an hour. When they're 12, they're doing 90, and so you're like, we've literally been frogs in boiling water. Just kept racing. Like, okay, well,
We're getting used to
get
it.
used to it. And so when
He's
we finally
had-
got the
yeah.
cars,
Yeah.
we were thinking that, oh wow, this is amazingly safe. There's seatbelts and Hans devices and great things like that. So I honestly felt better once he took the step, even though it was so much faster. They've got so much more protection around them.
Well, they have to be if they're going so fast. What's the difference, Granddaddy, about this year's Indy 500 and last time?
Well, the last time we got down to the last of the, trying to decide who was the last 2 or 3 cars in there, and Stingray was one of them. I come pretty close to throwing up that day, I think. I was so nervous.
The last chance qualifier.
There's only 33 cars in the Indy 500. There's 27 full-time the rest of the year, but 33 for the 500. But there's 35 or 6 people that have made an attempt to get in that 500. Somebody's going home.
And this year, how do you guys feel your chances are?
I feel much better.
We're still
Much better?
uncertain. We're still uncertain, but we're better, I
I
hope.
feel much better.
I think
I
everybody, seasoned drivers have been left out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every year, somebody it's a surprise.
You don't have to be rich to do it. Yeah, eat some food, Grandma. Eat some food.
I know that's going to be
that one.
crunchy.
That is lobster and shrimp taquitos. Doesn't that sound good?
Sounds wonderful. I'm gonna do some of this though. If that's okay.
I want some of this bread.
Yeah, that looks good.
Hold on.
Here, Larry, you want to pass?
Does anybody else want cheese bread? Because I'm going to have one. Would you like some, Grandpa? You got to eat something.
I'm
Larry.
good.
You're not going to eat anything?
I'm good.
You had too much bacon?
I had too much bacon.
Okay, I'm going to eat some.
I'll pass this around.
Dear Lord, we are so grateful and thankful for the time and opportunity to be here, Lord. And once again, we know that your hand is over all, and we just pray that you would continue to guide and direct, and pray that you would bless this time gathered around this table and bless the food and the hands that have prepared it. In your precious name we pray. Amen.
Stingray is very bold.
He's very bold.
Nothing scares him.
Where did he get that from?
I don't know. He's been that way all his life.
He has been that way all of his life. And I can tell you, you look at, he's got pray.com on his car now. As a 5, 6, 7-year-old, he would go and get duct tape, and it always had to be a bright color. And sometimes it was pink, sometimes it was green, but mostly bright fluorescent pink. And he'd put it in the shape of a cross on the front of his go-kart and write a Bible verse on it. So the kid has been using this as his mission field since we've started.
No, we come with a rich heritage of Christians, and we have lots of uncles that are pastors and grandparents that were evangelists. And in fact, some of our people in the 1850s were involved in the Underground Railroad. And it's a way of life in our family, really it is.
Is it true that he's inspired by Tim Tebow?
That kind of emboldened Stingray to do, he's like, I can do this too. Tim.
He looked up to
Yeah, he
him.
looked up to him, and he was a good role model. So thank you, Tim, wherever you are. We appreciate you.
We would have Sunday school, and Stingray would go get all the other little kids and bring them, and we'd have Sunday school before
At the
races.
track.
At the track.
At the track, and he was happy to go get the kids.
He's like, I'll go
They
get him.
were
I'll be right back.
And they were happy to come.
Oh, I'm
It was
sure.
cool.
That would have been a little different than being in the queues.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
You do that for 10 or 15 minutes, and just planting those seeds along the way. So it became a mission for all of us. Stingray's passion has become a mission for all of us. And so some point in time, we all went, oh, good grief, we're not going to change his mind. I mean, because we tried everything. We were like, go play golf. Let's go play tennis. Let's go play basketball. Let's do baseball. Let's do anything. This racing is hard. We're gone, 42 weekends a year, and it's expensive, and it's so much work. And there was no, he tried it all. He played it all. But there was no changing the kid's mind. He never wavered from this is the end goal. Never.
So if it's not the track, what is he really running for?
To have a positive impact on one life. It's like, if I can change one life, then it's all worth it.
When he was little, they would look up to him. Because the little kids, like you said, he'd be writing a scripture on his go-kart, and you'd look over there, and there'd be 3 or 4 little kids over there with him writing scriptures on his go-kart. So he was teaching it back then, and we have a lot of stories about that, but I think just the fact that he's so open and so willing to be helpful and not be afraid of it. Some of the stuff he
there's
does,
no
I'm
fear.
like, I had my oldest daughter call me one day. She says, well, what about all the naysayers when they put pray on the side of his car? And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, you see all the people who were saying negative things on the social media? And I said, yeah. And I just started laughing, and she goes, well, why are you laughing? I says, well, 15 had something to say about it, but there were 793 that were backing him. So how can you think that's a loss?
What do you think that says about your son? And what do you think about maybe we don't know, who are talking and sharing these stories, need to know about people who share their faith boldly?
Well, I think Stingray his character is very open. He comes across very open. I don't believe God offends when he's talking. I mean, a lot of people try to do that, but he just puts it out there so there's no arrogance, there's no acting in what he said. He's so good at it. He just says it, and it's like he just wants to help people. And we've had people defend him because they were, why would you be against that? What harm would Stingray want for you? Because he just carries it so well, and he's not afraid of it. So I think that's pretty good. And he's had a lot of spiritual experiences that we call experiences that when we traveled around the world, what I would call miracles.
Give me an example of what a miracle looks like for Stingray. Like
Miracle after miracle. He is exactly where he's supposed to be, because the money comes from the people that walk up to the tent.
$10 million a year to race an Indy
It's
car.
probably typical.
That's the average.
I don't know.
I'd say 8 to 10. This is an event that your son has dreamt of being in from the time he was 3. This is what we were, we didn't really know that was the goal, but it was his goal. And for you to be standing there, and you're standing in the middle of this giant facility that is absolutely packed with people, and it's silent while the national anthem is playing and airplanes are flying over, and you're standing here with your son who has reached the dream. This has been the goal from day one. And it's been, like I said, the mission became all of our mission. His passion for what he was, pushing to do became the mission for all of us. And so I felt like we all made it. We're here. We did this. It's amazing. It was such an overwhelming event. But what led up to that, I think, was what really made it so much more for us, is because the last chance qualifier, and like we said, you're one of 4 that are shooting for a spot there, and it's incredibly intense. And again, this is where you're watching your son's dream either make it or fail. And at the same time, like I said, we were, come on, Lord, just give us one break. It's been such a battle every step of the way. Give us one break and let him just make it into the top 28. We won't have to mess with this. The last chance qualifier is hard. But no, we didn't. We had to take the hard road again. Thank you, Lord. And so in that last chance qualifier, and he's got that John 3:16 on the halo of his car, and the first IndyCar driver to have that, ever to have a Bible verse. And being raised in the church and going to church and having faith and knowing the Bible and verses, we don't really think that other people don't know that. But there are so many people out there that have not had a word spoken to them or know about it or understand why. What does that mean? And the focus that was on those cars during that qualifier, we had people standing at the fence with their fingers through the chain link fence going, what is John 3:16? Why is that? You can just hear it in the background behind us. There's so much going on that we couldn't really
What is
focus.
John 3:16 for those who don't know it?
For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. And so who of him shall not perish but have everlasting life.
That
And
is
so-
the verse where in the Bible Christians know it as the one scripture that identifies that God had Jesus, his son, come to die in the
for
place
us.
of all of us because we weren't worthy
That's right.
of being in heaven and being in paradise.
Yeah.
don't know anything else.
That's
That's it.
it. That's the verse. And so
you
it's
don't have
it,
to know a whole
whole-
Bible
yeah.
to make it to heaven. You don't have to have a rich heritage behind you with all your families before to make it to heaven. It's you and him.
Yeah.
And that verse is the bridge.
And that's why it's so important to Stingray.
Yeah, and that is why it's so important to Stingray. And so we had people hanging on the fence asking, and so we got the chance to share that with people. And I said it was the reality there when we looked around, and I went, okay, God, forgive us for being human, for asking for an easier path, because the easier path would not have done that, wouldn't have given us that opportunity.
Easier path that Stingray's been on has involved wrecks, all kinds of doubts, is this really sort of what I'm supposed to be doing? And then another miracle happens. Yeah, okay. But it's, the ups and downs of getting the engine not bolted down at an important kart race.
Between me and Grandpa?
These were
I
his...
want you guys to tell. They have to tell that story because it truly
Which
is a.
one?
No, that one at Nationals with the engine.
These
falling
guys
off.
were his
mechanics.
We went
He was
to
go-karting.
Kerrville. He'd already won the Florida Winter Tour. He'd won the Can-Am race. He'd won the Gator. So it was all three of the international championships throughout the United States.
in 1 year.
And most of those, like Florida, Florida had 17 countries represented that when he won that championship. And he was the first, I think he was the first West Coast kid to do that. So they call that the Triple Crown. He won all three of them that year, and he was ranked #1 in the U.S. So we go to the Nationals, and of course, Dad's out there wrenching on his go-kart.
Dad
And
and Grandpa.
they go to qualify, and he takes off to qualify, and the first corner down there is a dust all over the place. His engine fell off.
His engine fell off.
Fell off the go-kart. I didn't bolt it down tight.
And I didn't double check it.
Yeah, it wasn't his fault.
So
He's
did-
got plenty that he did that was his fault.
But he doesn't have to own that
And
one.
we
He
got a
will.
lot of those stories. So anyway, he comes in and he's just kind of smiling. And he goes, "Well, I get to start last," because we always had a saying, Stingray, if you come in and you're like crying, Kimmy would always say, "You better have your shield down so people can't see you crying." And then I'd take him and I'd be walking with him. I'd be patting him on the back and I'd keep saying, "What's the next race?" That was a thing we always had, is don't trip over what's behind you. So those are life lessons, and I know that he's learned those lessons very well in his life. So he goes around the first corner. So that means that the next 3 heat races, there's 30 kids that he's got to race against. In all 3 of those heat races, he has to start 30th or 27th.
30th.
I think it's
Dead
27th.
last, because
Dead
that
last.
first race was a
So he
qualifier,
qualified.
and that's the one where he lost his engine because his
Yes.
pit crew.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
He has a new pit
It
crew
wasn't
now,
his,
right?
it wasn't his
Well, he
fault.
does now. So this guy that we know very well interviewed him, and he's interviewing Stingray, and he goes, "Well, Stingray, I think there's a bet out on how many go-karts you're going to pass this weekend trying to get to the front." And Stingray was laughing, and he goes, "Yeah, I kind of heard that." And he goes, "So we're like 3 heat races in. How many of you passed?" My bet was 78. He was going to pass 78 go-karts to get to where he could qualify for the final. And at the end of the week, he had passed 72 go-karts to try to get to the front. And he passed the guy that was in the lead, but earlier in the race, he had bumped him. So he let him go back around him before the final finish line. So he finished second in Nationals because he honored the fact that he had touched this guy's go-kart before that. And we had a big kind of a blow up with the officials because they thought that he was trying to affect the end of the race. It's probably the most angry I'd ever been at a go-kart race. And I told those guys, I said, "We're at the Nationals. Are you kidding me?" Anyway, because of his reputation, everybody kind of knew what happened and why. And they just figure, well, that's just what Stingray does. Nobody else in the world would have done that. I really don't believe any other go-kart racer in the United States would have done that.
And how old was he when that happened?
13 or 12? 12.
12 or 13. So somewhere he received the respect, the integrity, the character. Where did he get that from?
I think all of us. I don't know anybody in our family that wouldn't do that. I mean, we had the wrong tires on one time, and
You put the wrong tires on the cart, Grandpa?
well, yeah, but get this,
They
they
go
were
admit
the
it.
wrong tires. They weren't the good ones,
They were the bad ones.
and he only did it on 2 of the tires, and they caught him. And the lady that caught us said to the official, who's supposedly a friend of mine, "That's your friend. What do you?" I said, "Look, put us at the back. He's going to win the race anyway." Sure
So
enough.
did he win?
He won the Indy Pro 2000 at the time. That's what it was called, was the Indy Pro 2000 championship, which you earn scholarships, and those scholarships help you move to the next level. And so he went from the Indy Pro 2000 to Indy Lights, spent a couple of seasons in Indy Lights, and in that second season, he got second in the championship, which ultimately led him to IndyCar. And so it was enough, you had enough power in your backing there to move up to IndyCar. And so that progression, I think all those years in karting taught him how to deal with the difficult times, with the challenges that arise, that if you'd been at the front all the time and it was just easy, it makes it so you can't deal with the challenges along the way. And so I think that all of these, having your folks as your mechanics, there was a time when Larry wasn't at a race and we got to be the mechanics. And
Grandma and
boy,
Mama.
his wheel fell off.
Grandpa and Grandma.
Yeah, me. Yeah, it was us. It was us.
I
And
know
so
you'd be there if you
the
were,
wheel,
yeah.
the wheel fell off the axle. I mean, it was a total zoo. But nonetheless, he still did okay. But with that being said, I think that's what made him a stronger person, a better driver, a man of character. Because it would be pretty easy to come back and yell at your peeps.
I was
who are-
gonna say, do you guys?
Would have
Does
been
he-
easy to give up.
Does he blow up on you guys? Does he have to forgive you guys a lot? Do you
He
have to
looks at us
forgive?
with a lot of
Do you
grace.
guys have to forgive yourself a
looks at
lot?
us with
I
a
think
lot
that's
of grace.
closer
Yes,
to what you
yes.
just said. Forgive ourselves, because he's good. He's playing
like,
baseball
yeah,
over there.
he goes
with
over
the
there and
kid
plays
with the
catch with
drivers.
somebody. So we know that God gave us to him for a lot of reasons, and it was to help build him up, character-wise and perseverance-wise, and just sheer determination. But we were not the best pit crew ever, and
I didn't know that families were the pit crews, so I learned a lot.
Well, they aren't always.
They aren't.
typically that's not the case.
We kept trying until we got to Texas and we were at a nationals race. And we'd gone down there and hooked up with some people to be in their tent. And I had 2 engines, and we blew up the first engine, and they wouldn't let me work on it. They said, you have to do a new engine. And then the trailer caught on fire and literally burned the whole truck and trailer down to the ground. It was aluminum, and it melted it. And
Wow.
and we had already blown up 2 engines, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I just said, you're going to have to start last because we got this 1 engine left. So I had a friend, I ended up borrowing some of his engines, and we went back into what was left of that tent and trailer, and we worked out of that spot. But in the middle of that, we were on our knees praying, and people were scurrying like they do on TV, running from, on TV. They always run to the other side of the road when we did that. He started last, and 14 laps into the race, the guy that was helping me with the engine said, we got nothing. And I just said, let's wait and see. It was like a 28-lap race. And at the end of the race, the guy in front of him was getting the checkered flag, and Stingray was behind him quite a ways, and we had a rule, don't look back. If you look back, you're going to lose time. And they got a picture of him when they were looking at the finish line, and he was turned completely around like this, looking back. Remember, he started last place. And he came across in second place. And he says, it was great, because it was the first time that
But he shouldn't have looked back.
he shouldn't have looked back. And I said, well, what was this deal about not looking back? And he goes, well, I looked up, and there was Christian up there ahead of me. And I'm like, where'd everybody go?
He passed
Didn't he
them
look
all.
back? He didn't. He did. And he'll tell you to this day, he does not remember driving that race. He said, somebody else was driving. And it's one of those moments where you know that your son is listening to what we believe is God. He didn't remember driving. Somebody else had the wheel.
Do you believe Jesus took the wheel?
Oh, absolutely.
So that was the epitome of the song right
I don't know
there.
if you saw the wheel come out
That's,
last
I
year.
mean, we pray about that all the time, just protect him and take care of him. And it would be, to say that that's coincidence, but we have so many things that were like that. We lost all of our credentials when we went to Italy in the underground of Paris and couldn't find them anywhere. I mean, it was passports, all of everything, because we were going to Italy to race. And he said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, I guess we're going to have to just get on our knees and pray. And we're in the middle of this subway, and People don't think much of that over there. But we did it anyway.
So when you say people don't think much of that,
People
were
praying.
they spitting on you? What?
And I didn't
they
care
were
who
cussing
saw
at
us.
you, or
I didn't care who saw us.
what were they
What
doing?
did they say?
They would just walk by and, Now, but the little old lady that walked up and said, well, what's going on? I said, well, we're just trying to pray because I lost everything we have. I don't know how we're going to get to the race.
Yeah.
No passports. Well, she said, okay, I'll pray with you. And we'd already said our prayer, and I said, well, thank you very much. And then we went upstairs, and where we hadn't been, the little guy with the little Charles de Gaulle hat on blows this whistle because he's directing traffic. And Stingray caught his attention like that. He looked over there and he goes, up against the curb and against the railing was our notebook with all of our stuff in it. We hadn't even been there.
So did that guy point it out to you, or
No,
was it on the
Stingray-
ground?
When
saw
he blew
it.
the whistle and Stingray looked over there and he goes, Dad, there's our notebook. And went over there and sure enough,
So-
it was there.
It's a supernatural answer to prayer.
Yes,
You know it and believe that in your heart.
absolutely.
That there's no way you could have gotten that.
Otherwise, you would have never,
been to that
you
spot.
never been to look there. But the guy's standing there and blows his whistle. You're like,
So
look
you
over
guys,
here.
So pray.com and having John 3:16 on the car.
They don't even know all these stories.
Pray.com.
There's no way they can know this because we haven't been able to even sit down and talk to them.
Oh,
like
guess
this.
what? Now they're gonna know.
I know, this is great.
Pray.com for you is just, in a sense, it's a symbol of what you guys have been doing your whole life.
Absolutely. I believe it's an answer.
It's an
It's an
answer.
answer to our prayers. And I hope that it's an answer to their prayers, that they have somebody that can really represent them and be real about it. We know the fact that Stingray is real about all of that stuff, way more than I deserve, or way more than what I think anybody else is deserving of, but he just does it because that's who he is. And he'll tell you it's because of whose he is. And he's pretty clear about that. One of his favorite scriptures is, I must become less so God can become greater. And he's pretty adamant about some of those scriptures. He's got a lot of them. So
We believe there's power in prayer. Absolutely.
It's not just a
100%.
slogan.
No.
It's not just the endorsement. It's not just the partnership. It's not just something that
We believe.
you stuck on the car.
we believe it.
We believe.
Is this Stingray? Is this the actual Stingray in person?
is.
I'm
Hi.
sorry. Hi, we haven't seen you. How are you?
No, not right now. Hi, Philip. I'll meet you in a little bit once we get the hugs and stuff down.
Sorry, we hadn't seen him in a bit. Give us.
No, this is the whole point. You guys haven't seen each other in 3 weeks. Dad's here. Nice to meet
Good to
you
meet you.
officially. Thanks. Sit down. We got a seat for you.
Okay.
I just had this lovely and lengthy conversation with your entire family here. How important is it that you get to do life, first of all, doing what you love, but also being with all these wonderful people?
It's good. It's very important. I think it's what's kind of kept me humble. Yeah, and also motivated me at times. I think there's definitely days where I was like, guys, I don't think I want to do this anymore like Stingray. Just look at what God has done already. It's like, all right, you're right.
Why do you say there's days that you think, I don't know if I want to do this anymore? What is it that you'd rather be doing?
We're guaranteed in this life to have struggles. Guaranteed. And so I think that racing kind of fast forwards that button a little bit because we're competitive and it's what I want to do, right? So it's the things that you care about the most that hurt you the most sometimes. So for me, like racing has been the worst days, it's also been the best days. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I think that you'll find I'm going to talk to you like I'm your big sister because I feel like now I'm an adopted daughter or cousin or something since I've been sitting here, we've been eating and stuff. But I think that's true of everything.
Yeah.
That, with a love or a devotion to anything, there's struggle. Anything worth doing, right, is hard. Now, I can't imagine going 240 miles around a racetrack as part of my struggle. I can't even relate. I have no desire to do what you're doing. Why do you think that that's something that's in you?
It's from day one what I've been doing. I mean, I used to sit in the back seat of her car and she'd take off from like a stoplight or a stop sign or something and I would go faster, faster, faster. It was just like whatever that G-force loving kid that was in me is still there today.
Do you ever go to amusement parks?
Sometimes.
Disney World.
I kind of
Disneyland?
live it, so I don't really need to go.
Right, you live the ride. Yeah. I was wondering. I was like, does he care when he gets on roller coasters? Does that even affect
They're fun.
him?
They're fun.
He's
I do
like,
them.
I've done bigger things than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are you most looking forward to? I mean, in terms of the Indy 500 and getting back on that track again, there's a lead up. There's the road to Indy.
Yes.
And there's all these other races that you're participating in. What is it that's kind of like your North Star at this point?
For the season, I think the Indy 500 is one that I look forward to, just because, like, it's the greatest spectacle in racing. That's why it's titled that, because it really is. Like, it's a beautiful event, and also, like, you were to ask any driver in any series across the globe if they wanted to win the Indy 500, they would say yes. Like, that's a bucket list item for any driver. And last year, the team that I'm on now, which is AJ Foyt Racing, they finished third. I think they had a chance to win. Santino was wise, probably, to not force the issue too much, considering the chaos that happened that day. But I think that we'll have a good race car going into the month of May. And Indy 500 is like kind of the one where if you win it, nothing else really matters for the rest of the year. Most of the people thought that it was a fake name, and they'd always ask me, "Is that your real name?" And I'd answer yes. 7-year-old Stingray had that down pat. He knew what he was going to say every time.
Do you feel like kind of having that role of having to explain yourself at a young age, or maybe identify with people, even though you had such a unique name, prepared you for what you're doing today?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was good to practice from an early age, for sure. It's definitely been a huge part of my career. I mean, I think that's what people see most often. They usually ask the question of like, well, your parents are probably from like California or Florida, right? Like aquatic biologist. Like, no, that's not it.
It was the car.
It was the car.
The Stingray
Corvette. Yeah.
And do you think there's anything that you have as a personality trait or a distinguishing trait, like a distinguishing character, that actually is like a Stingray Corvette? I know that's a random question.
I don't know.
You like speed.
I like speed. The cars are cool. I'd like to think I'm cool. Depends on that. Depends on the day how I'm feeling, but yeah, I mean, they're just cool cars.
Well, I think you're cool because you have this unique understanding of your influence in the world. I mean, you're 22, right?
Yeah.
When's your birthday?
September 3rd.
Okay, so you're gonna be 23 this year?
I am.
Okay. You have already decided that you're gonna use your platform to present a message to the world.
Yeah.
And it's not a message that everybody is super excited about.
By no means.
Have you had people give you a hard time because of your bold proclamation of your faith?
Yeah, I think so, a little bit. I mean, usually people are pretty kind face to face, but go to social media and that's a different story.
Talk to me about how old you were when you decided you were going to be public about your faith in God and Jesus.
Oh man, it was very early. I think I had my inspiration. So whatever year Tim Tebow won the national championship in football, I remember seeing him wear the John 3:16 eye black. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, I need to do that in my own version. So I remember I was probably 7 or 8 years old. I would put pink duct tape on the front fairing of my go-kart. And I would put it in a cross of the vertical stripe and then a horizontal stripe across the middle. And I would write a verse on it almost every weekend. And so I did that most weekends that I was in a go-kart from the time I was 7, 8 years old to the time I was 14 years old.
And did you know why you were doing it? Did you know why Tim Tebow was doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I had a faith that I needed to share. I felt like God had given me a platform, and whether how big or small that was at the time, because I was racing in podunk nowhere, middle of America, doing go-kart racing.
But you were winning
I was winning.
a lot.
I was at that time. So, and I mean, I got to travel the world doing that too. So I say podunk, middle of nowhere, America, but at the same time, I've been to many European countries for the sake of driving go-karts. And then I got to share my faith along the way.
What was it about your upbringing that made you feel like this is the right thing to do, to talk about Jesus everywhere you went?
Oh man, I don't think I ever had a question of whether it was the wrong thing to do. I mean, I think I had pushback at different times from friends or peers or other drivers, whatever else it may be. But I was raised in a home that was very outspoken about their faith, but I was also homeschooled until the age of 7, not by my parents, but by a lady from our church. And I think the most impactful thing from that, I could say, is that I didn't just get it preached to me. I mean, the word was something that I got to see in the home, in her home, and how she interacted as a believer with her own family and her own community. And I remember specifically, like, we would go down to the church and do our walk and talks, and we would pick weeds out of the sidewalk of the church on the way back and everything else, and trying to just like live the Christian life, and she tried to show me that through her actions more than just her words. And so when I saw that, I think it inspired me to do it in my career. And that time was go-karting. Even as an 8 or 9-year-old, that was my career. That's what I'd wanted to do.
What would you say is the most concerning thing or the most distinguishing trait of Gen Zers today?
I think there was a stat a little while ago that I read that Gen Z is the loneliest generation in history. And I think that's very interesting because we're the most connected generation in history. You look at how many platforms we have to connect to one another. You have all kinds of social media. We can pull out a black box out of our pocket and call someone on the other side of the world face to face. And so I look at that and I wonder, okay, so what are we missing? And I think that the faith aspect is a big part of that. I think it was C.S. Lewis that wrote, if you want to remove God from your life, remove boredom from your life. And I think that also plays into loneliness. I think that in a sense we're supposed to feel that sort of calling into something deeper. That God-sized hole in our heart can't be filled by any of these things, those social media platforms, the internet, a phone call to the person across the world. Those are things that God can fill. And when you twist it and try and fill it with an alternative form, it falls out. It's not going to work. So I think it's important to look at that and consider why, because it shouldn't be that way.
So do you think that a lot of people your age are filling their lives with communication but not connection?
For sure. And I think that life's challenging and it's easy to try and cope with as many things as we have out there today. And to be honest, we live in a wonderful country. America is great and there's so much opportunity and ways that we can kind of cope because we just have everything at our fingertips. So I think it's easy to reach out to those rather than seeking a deeper answer.
Talk to me about when you're putting John 3:16 and pray.com is sponsoring your vehicle. You're the first professional racer ever to actually place a Bible verse on your vehicle?
I think I'm the first one in Indy car racing.
Okay.
It's pretty cool.
That's a big step. That's something significant.
Yeah.
What kind of message are you really sending to your generation?
Let's start with pray.com because I think that they're kind of the catalyst for this, right? I mean, I could have had any sponsor on the car, but we mutually agreed to do this one because we saw genuine interest and purpose in our missions. Pray.com's mantra is make prayer a priority. And I think when you look at that, it's an answer to the calling of God saying, seek my face. He wants us to be in relationship. Well, how do we be in relationship? It's through prayer. That is our connection to God, and that's how we discuss, and that's how we meditate. God's word says to meditate on it day and night. Well, how do we meditate? Because as Christians, we're not sitting in a dark room with gongs playing and emptying our mind. We want to be filling our mind with something that is alternative to what the world may say is bad or good or bad or whatever else may be. And so that's meditating on God's word through prayer. And so I think that our common goal is to build a relationship with someone that can give you fulfillment and peace and purpose. And so I would say that that's kind of what my goal is, and that's hopefully the message that I'm bringing to the table amongst, let your career have more than just success. Let it be purposeful in and outside of it. I think that so often we look at career as so separate from our lives, but that's not who we're created to be. As humans, we're very intrinsically designed people, right? We are mind, body, spirit. And so we don't want to completely separate everything from each other. We want them to be included because they all flow in together. We're the same person, whether we're at work or whether we're at home. And so we want to be able to have that connection through each one and that purpose through each one.
Do you think that when you talk about prayer or when you have that pray.com logo on your vehicle, that it's a conversation starter? Because there's so many people who don't understand what prayer means or what meditation on the word means.
Yeah. I think it can be. I think more often than not it's a seed that's planted and people go and search it out themselves because pray.com is an app that you take home on your phone. They don't need to have a conversation with me about it. They just need to go seek it for themselves. And I've had multiple text messages come to me with someone that I didn't really know was a practicing believer or maybe wasn't seeking it at the time. And they'll say, hey, I don't know what these pray.com people are doing, but they're reading my mind. And they'll send me a screenshot of the verse of the day or whatever else it may be. And it's a great verse, but I'm like, that is wonderful because it's not something that I'm even doing. I'm just putting the name out there in front of them and saying, hey guys, go take a look at this. And that tool can point them to something, point them to the conduit that lets them build that relationship.
Do you think that you're a role model for other people, whether they're in their 20s and launching a career, or somebody who's just kind of seeking and trying to discover what their lane is? I see so many similarities between racing and life.
Yeah.
Where, we have to stay in our lane, where we're endeavoring to win in life, but it's not always easy.
Yeah.
Are you a role model?
I don't know. I
You
don't
don't
know the
know?
answer to that. I think a lot of times yes, but that's not how I see myself. I mean, I'm not looking at myself in the morning and saying, all right, be the best you can be because you need to be that person in front of those people. Like you said, I'm seeking and learning and trying to be the best that I can be and win races and be good at my career. And I want everything that I do to be genuine. And I think that if I look at myself as a role model, it becomes ingenuine at times.
If you think if you look at yourself as a role model, it becomes ingenuine. What do you mean by that?
I think that if I find my identity in being a role model, I will lose myself in a way, because I'll build this persona, this picture, this identity around who I think I need to look like in order to be a role model, rather than just being who I am.
And who is that?
I think I'm working on that still. I'm a young believer that is pursuing a career and a passion that I've had from an early age, and is trying the best that I can to be a good son, be a good family member, to be a good friend, to be a good fiance.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
By the way, I'm sure your fiance appreciates that you put that out there.
Yeah, she's awesome. I love her to death.
You get to experience love in a whole new way. You get to experience enjoyment in a whole new way in relationship. What do you think you've learned in this past season of life about yourself and about romance?
One thing that I think is interesting that I've learned recently is kind of the correlation between God's design in a relationship with a significant other and his design with him in the church, and kind of how he's called the men, the husbands, to represent him in sacrificing for the church, sacrificing for the wife. And so we just started premarital counseling, so this is all stuff that I'm regurgitating out for you guys. But it's been interesting to kind of see like God's design come out in something other than just his word or in my personal relationship with God. It's coming out in his design for us, my fiance and I.
And for you, and we were talking a little bit off camera about it, and if it's okay, we'll talk a little bit on camera about it.
Yeah.
But you're seeing how with your fiance, she just wants to be with you.
Yeah.
You don't have to make some extravagant plans. You don't have to have a schedule. You don't have to have an agenda or an itinerary.
Yeah.
And you're seeing similarities between that relationship, that romance, and your relationship with God. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm sure most people have heard of the 5 love languages. And so I've been doing a little bit of studying on that, because that's something that's going into having quality marriage, hopefully, with my fiance in the future, is understanding each other's love languages. And so one of her love languages, I think, is quality time. And I was recently reading in Psalms, and David was talking about how all he wants to do is to seek the Lord's face and spend time in his presence. And I read that and I'm like, that's my fiance too. Like, that's what she wants.
She
It's
just
like,
wants to come and
yeah,
sit next
she's
to
like,
you.
hey, I don't really want to go to that social event. I don't care if we like go to the park or anything. I just want to sit and be and talk and just have presence with you. And I think that that's what God wants. He wants us to seek his face and not necessarily his will, if that makes sense. I mean, he wants us to seek his will and his purpose for us and where he wants us to go. But at the same time, he wants a relationship with us of just being.
How much meditation do you do before you get behind the wheel?
Probably not enough at times. One thing I really like to do before races, I'll spend like 10, 15 minutes just sitting and almost like taking a nap. I'll just go lay down and just be for a little bit. And that's usually time where I say, all right, God, like, I'm ready for whatever you have prepared today. If you want to speak to me, speak to me. If not, I'm going to be here anyways. And please let me just be a conduit for whatever your will may be today.
And then, is that your way of getting in the zone?
For sure. I think in a way. But I think it's also a turning over of results. In a results-driven industry, I think it's really easy to have your identity tied to that day's performance. And if you have a really bad day, you're going to feel like a really bad person. If you have a really good day, you're going to feel like a really good person. And that's not how life goes. You're not who your results are. You are who God says you are. And so that's kind of the exchange that's happening. It's the exchange of lies to truth. and finding my identity in who he says I am versus what the number of the day might say I am.
And that has to be really challenging to wrap your brain around, because not only are you facing, it's not just results, it's wins. Like, you have a lot of money. Your parents were telling me about how much of an investment other people are making, sponsors are making.
Yeah.
And then you're part of a culture, we're all part of a culture where a lot of times we get caught up in the chase.
Yeah.
The paper chase, you know, going after money, going after fame, going after success. So how has your faith helped you to stay centered on, your dad mentioned it, whose you are versus who you are?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's so necessary because, like I said, your identity can be so tied to your work, your success, whatever else it may be, or the lack thereof. And if you do that, you lose so much of who you are. And I think that faith is kind of the seasoning of life at times, right? Like it adds flavor, but it also accentuates the flavor that's already there. And so I'm hopeful that my faith allows me to be who I am even more so, but also makes me have that character and that design that God intended.
You know, being versus doing is what I would call it.
Yeah.
Is what I think you're communicating. With all of that in mind, you still really enjoy racing.
Oh yeah, you have to. Yeah. I mean, the beautiful thing about racing is that it is a love, passion sport for me, and that's what I grew up doing. I mean, I think that God creates us for certain things in our lives, and he gives us passions for a reason. He's passionate, right? And he says that we're made in his image, so of course we're going to have our own passions that we need to act out and perform in. So yeah, I love racing.
And you're good at it.
At times,
You're-
yes.
Well, I mean, I know you've had some struggles. There's been times when you haven't won races, but you've had a very successful stretch of years that have led you to making it back on the Indy 500 track. What kind of prayer do you pray, or what kind of preparation do you do in your heart that might be different from other IndyCar drivers?
Did my mom share the prayer that we prayed before we race?
No.
No, she didn't?
No.
Oh, man, I
So you
should've
get
had her.
to.
Okay, so my mom has prayed a prayer for myself and for everyone involved for a very long time. And that's, God give us eyes to see the path, the wisdom to go forth, and speed to get there. And a lot of times you hear in an executive or a business world, you need vision, strategy, and execution. Well, that's our vision, our strategy, and our execution. God give them eyes to see the path. We want to be able to see the path in order to be able to take it. God give them eyes to see the path, the wisdom to go forth. We want to be able to see that open opportunity, whatever else it may be, and have the wisdom to get there, how to get there, and also how to get through there, and then the speed to get there. We want to execute quickly and effectively. So that's kind of been the prayer that I've had at different points in my career, where it's like, okay, God, guide us, lead us, direct us, all that stuff, but do it in a way that you would have it done.
Whether you win or lose at the Indy 500, what do you see yourself doing in the next 5-10 years? What do you see down the path at 22 years old?
Well, I'll be married at that time.
Yeah, which is crazy.
It's
Good,
awesome.
right? That's
It is
wonderful.
awesome. I'm hopeful that I'll have a few championships under my belt in motorsports. I'm hopeful that my career has moved on beyond racing, and I can be able to have a few other projects to work on as well. But I also think one of my big dreams is to live a life where I can get to experience God's creation more than just a career. I think it's very easy to be obsessive over career, and I think it's necessary at times to kind of have that obsession in order to become great at it. But at the same time, I don't want to lose sight of the grander view of the beautiful things that are out there other than racing.
One thing that your parents and your grandparents shared with me is that they were your pit crew
Yeah.
many, many times, especially in the go-kart days.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of mistakes made at different times
Yeah.
with tires and engines and fuel.
Yeah.
And I mean, some of the stories sound like a comedy. Were you always just good-humored about it? Were you sometimes angry about it? Did you have to forgive them? Or how did you feel growing up when you knew that they did something that caused you to go to the back?
I specifically remember a time, well, my grandpa probably told this story about him not putting the right fuel in the go-kart. And I remember I got disqualified, and I was like, oh, well, we'll start at the back and go to the front. No big deal. And I was 7 or 8 years old. I had been through it at that point enough to realize, it's fine. It's just another day at the racetrack. But my grandpa took it hard. And he was like, I'm never working on his pit crew again. I'm a failure. I don't want to do this. And he went out to the pickup, and I remember he was crying. And my parents and my grandma, they said, Stingray, you got to go out there and like get him back like together. And so I hiked out to the pickup, and I opened the door, and I sit in the truck with him. And I remember I was like, Papa, I need you. I need your help, and I forgive you. But we have a race in like 15 minutes. We got to go back to work. Like, come on, we got to get this thing moving. And so I think that along the way I learned how to forgive. But at the same time, it was very fun because I made mistakes too. Like, there's no doubt. And it was fun to have that kind of shared relationship of no matter what happens, no matter what we do, we're going to be there for each other and we're going to be able to move on to the next thing. And I think that was so important because it gave me space to learn, and it also gave them space to learn. I think that you have to have that grace for one another if you're going to get better.
When I was hearing their stories, I thought that's probably one of the hardest things, whether someone's an atheist or a church boy or church girl. They have a hard time forgiving other people or forgiving themselves. What would you say that might actually help other people?
Yeah, one of the important things that I learned along the way was that lesson of loving each other through it all, because that commitment, that loyalty, that respect, it's not necessarily circumstance, it's choice.
Yeah.
And that was something that I had to learn for myself as well. How do I feel about myself when I fail myself? How do I forgive myself? How do I have grace for myself? And when I did that, I mean, it was learned because of their interactions with me, and I got to see their reflection to me of what I needed to feel like.
So when you saw them give themselves a hard time or beat themselves up, you actually got a picture of how you might treat yourself.
Yeah.
And how much grace you showed them, you actually learned to show yourself.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
And you learned that as a kid.
Yeah.
Oh, you're miles
Here's
ahead
the
of
deal.
most of us.
That's a lesson that keeps coming about all the time. It's
Yeah.
not just like one and done. I mean, it's constant.
Yeah.
So,
Well, like you said, lots of grace.
yep.
And the stands will be packed, cheering Stingray and the other drivers on. We hope you enjoyed this episode of One Nation Under God. You can catch more of our Indy 500 coverage on television and online at newsnationnow.com. And of course, catch us every single week for another episode every Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern here on News Nation's YouTube about how everyday Americans are pursuing their version of life, liberty, and happiness through their faith. If you'd like to catch up on all of our stories, go to newsnationnow.com. Just search One Nation Under God. Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.